Hello and welcome to Study with Sudhir. My name is Sudhir and we are looking at a poem which is part of the ISC English Literature syllabus for class 11 and 12, and this is The Spider and the Fly. Before we get to the poem, just a few words about spiders. It's an interesting species and they are supposed to bring both good luck and bad luck depending on which country you live in. For instance, I was doing some reading. Of course, the most popular spider is of course the Spider-Man, but if a black spider is spotted at home, I am told it is thought in some countries to be a sign of impending death. In some countries, a spider crawling into your pocket is supposed to make you financially rich. In Russia, a spider, if found at the dinner table, means that a new enemy is actually lurking around. Quite interesting that. While in Turkey, a spider seen at home means that you can expect some guests. Of course, as I said, this has got nothing to do with this poem written by Mary Botham Howitt. The brief introduction which has been given in your textbook is something which you should know, which you should read and remember a few points from. She was educated at home, it says, by a strict Quaker father. Now, a Quaker is someone who believes in God, who believes that there is a bit of God in everyone, and therefore Quakers value all people equally. The other important point which has been mentioned here is that she published around 180 books, very prolific writer obviously, and that ranged from writing children's stories to two of her own autobiographies to original novels and also books related to history. The last paragraph is something which you should actually use in your answers, I would advise, because it says that this particular poem was written to educate children about the realities of the natural world. It's a cautionary tale. Please use this phrase. It's a cautionary tale about the manner in which the innocent and the gullible, now gullible are those who can be easily cheated, can be won over by the wily and shrewd predators who abound in society. The poem reads like a fantasy or fable, as the spider and the fly both act and behave like human beings. That's another important aspect of this poem. Ultimately, they act as metaphors for certain types of people who exist in society. Now, I would suggest that you keep the book in front of you, open the poem, keep a pencil and also a notebook and a pen so that you can write down the notes. You could either listen to the entire explanation, which I can tell you is probably the best explanation you would find on the net, on YouTube, and take down notes later, or you can keep pausing the video and take down notes at the same time. If you listen to the entire video once and then take down notes in the second reading, even though that will consume more time, it will act like a revision for you, right? So entirely up to you. Now let's start with stanza 1. Will you walk into my parlor? Said the spider to the fly. It's the prettiest little parlor that ever you did spy. The way into my parlor is up a winding stair, and I have many pretty things to show when you are there. Oh, no, no, said the little fly, to ask me is in vain, for who goes up your winding stair can never come down again. So you can see the rhyming pattern. It's pretty obvious from the way the poem, the stanza is rhyming. And please remember, the target audience is children. So you need to have that attractive rhyming pattern in order to capture and hold the interest of the children. Now the poem starts with an invite. It's a very attractive invite because the parlor is a sitting room in a private house, and the spider is clearly very good at marketing itself and its domain. It calls it the prettiest little parlor that the fly would have ever seen. Now in the second sentence of the first stanza, the word used is spy. Now spy, the moment you hear the word, your antenna should ideally go up, because you do not use the word spy in a very positive sense, do you? Because a spy means to view something, to look at something secretly in a stealthy kind of manner without the other person knowing about it. Now, because if you are actually extending an invite, you would say, why don't you come home? You would see the prettiest view from the balcony of my house. But when you use a word like spy, it's like, something being done stealthily. So by the usage of this word, the spider is actually unconsciously, inadvertently dropping a hint of his real intention, right? And the poetess also, by using this word for the spider in the spider's dialogue, is actually warning the children, the target audience, of what the real intention of the spider possibly is, what is the spider's plan. Now, the spider markets, as I said, the parlor quite aggressively. It talks also of the winding stair and says there is more up there. Now, the word used again is pretty, right? The prettiest little parlor, right? Which shows that the spider knows and thinks that the fly has an eye for things which are pretty, right? What does the fly say in reply? It says to ask me is in vain, right? In vain being the operative word. Now here vain of course means that the fly wants to say that it is useless to invite me, but vain also is used in an interesting way out here, because as we see later in the poem, it is vanity and succumbing to false praise. Vanity, the word comes from the word vain. That's what causes the suffering to the fly. It also shows, mind you, that the fly is actually very aware that she knows that whoever goes up on that winding stair actually never comes down again. So in that sense, the winding stair has been established here as a staircase, as a stairway to death. And also the web which is woven by the spider, you see, it almost keeps going up like that, which is why that whole imagery of a winding stair. Now, usually a winding stair would be ideally seen as a lovely piece of architecture, right? A very beautiful piece of architecture. And here it obviously shows that the spider is using beauty, the temptation of beauty, in order to trap the fly. Now, another messaging from the poet is that you should not be tempted by the outward beauty of anything, the outward beauty on the surface, and that despite the charming invitation that is being extended by the spider out here, the fly is mercifully on guard. So what you gauge immediately in the first stanza is the relationship between the spider and the fly is one that of the predator and the prey. When someone invites you to his home, it means that the person thinks of you as a friend, that he likes you. But here we realize that the fly is a very aware insect. It is aware that the spider has actually killed its previous guest, and therefore she should not accept the spider's invitation. Let's now move over to stanza 2. I am sure you must be weary, dear, with soaring up so high. Will you rest upon my little bed? Said the spider to the fly. There are pretty curtains drawn around, the sheets are fine and thin, and if you like to rest a while, I will snugly tuck you in. Oh no, no, said the little fly, for I have often heard it said, they never wake again who sleep upon your bed. Now, quite a few interesting points out here. The last sentence, you see the usage of the word never twice. So it shows an emphasis and a very emphatic refusal by the fly to the invitation that is being extended by the spider. Now, having noticed that the fly does not get enticed by the prospect of stepping into a pretty little parlor, the spider changes its strategy. He now expresses concern, right? It's a different emotion that is being expressed. Knowing fully well that this also could possibly work with the fly, he says that the fly must be really tired, weary, tired of flying so high, and offers his bed for the fly to rest on. He also points out that the chamber where the bed is located is a very beautiful place with pretty curtains, and this is really a reference to the web of the spider, which almost looks like that, looks like a curtain. And the sheets are fine and thin. Again, if you notice the spider's web, each and every strand is actually very fine and very thin, right? So it is that imagery which has been used by Mary Botham while she is describing the house of the spider. Soaring up so high. So along with expressing concern, the spider is also using an element of flattery, right? Saying that, oh, you do manage to fly so high. Snugly tuck. Now, tuck is actually a word which is used in a positive sense, in a sense of providing comfort, right? But when you say tucked in the web of the spider, you actually mean getting trapped. Now here the fly demonstrates that it is smart. It says that I've heard that whoever sleeps on that bed never actually wakes up again. So it's like the earlier reference to the staircase to death, this is like the bed of death. It shows that the fly has its ear to the ground. She knows the reputation of the spider. It also shows that yet again, by the usage of the word never wake again, oh no no, it shows emphasis by the double usage of these words, and it also shows a very clear mind and determination and being firm in her refusal. We'll come to discussing all these poetic devices at the end of the explanation of the poem. Stanza 3. Said the cunning spider to the fly, dear friend, what can I do to prove the warm affection I have always felt for you? I have within my pantry good store of all that's nice. I'm sure you're very welcome. Will you please to take a slice? Oh no, no, said the little fly. Kind sir, that cannot be. I have heard what's in your pantry and I do not wish to see. In the third stanza, it shows that the spider is clever. It's also persistent, right? And really wants to have the fly as his meal, come what may. So now it also signifies, along with persistence, it also shows a sense of desperation that is now building up as far as the spider is concerned, because he continues to try and lure the fly into his web. It's ironical that, of course, that the spider is actually tempting the fly with food, whereas he actually wants to have the fly as his food. And it is little things like these that make the poetry of Mary Botham interesting, especially when it is being told to children. That's what she's kind of using these kind of interesting comparisons with. And when you learn English literature, it's always important to make these connections in order to be able to analyze it that much better. Now, by now we realize, as I said, that the spider is desperate to tempt the fly by pointing out different aspects, different facets of its house and parlor and whatnot. The winding stair, the little bed, and now the pantry, the food in the pantry. In that sense, the humanification of the spider, and as we said earlier, it's a fable. It's written in the fable format. So the humanification of both the spider and the fly is absolutely complete. It could well be the story of two human beings, one trying to trap the other, the story of a predator or a prey. It could well be a lion and a deer, right, in the animal kingdom. Now, another interesting aspect in this particular poem is the element of politeness. Look at how the spider is actually referring to the fly as dear friend, and the fly also replies in kind, saying, kind sir. So there is that element of politeness that is built into this conversation between this predator and the possible prey. Now, the last line, however, shows that the fly continues to be very firm and very resolute in refusing this invitation of the spider. It says, I do not wish to see, and it shows that her mind is made up and what she actually thinks of the spider. The fourth stanza. Sweet creature, said the spider, you are witty and you are wise. How handsome are your gauzy wings, how brilliant are your eyes. I have a little looking glass upon my parlour shelf. If you will step in one moment, dear, you shall behold yourself. I thank you, gentle sir, she said, for what you are pleased to say, and bidding you good morning now, I'll call another day. Now, the fourth stanza is the middle stanza of this poem, and it actually marks a shift, a sharp shift in strategy as far as the spider is concerned. So far, he was telling her about different aspects of what all is there inside the domain, the parlor of the spider. But now it changes its strategy in order to trap the fly, and you need to notice this nuance. Now it praises the physical appearance of the fly, right? It calls its gauzy wings as handsome. Now, gauzy means thin and translucent like a gauze, and gauze is something which you would have seen in your chemistry lab. It also calls her eyes as brilliant. Not only that, he also praises the fly, calling her witty and wise. Now, it's a little strange. Wise one can understand because she has displayed her wisdom in turning down the invitation of this spider, but witty we really don't know. So you also realize that he's indulging in absolutely fake and false praise and basically trying to make the fly feel pleased. The spider also indirectly is acknowledging the fly's wisdom in not falling into the trap being laid by the spider. And this time the spider unveils the little looking glass, which essentially means a mirror, because the mirror, as you know, is a symbol of vanity, is a symbol of narcissism, and the spider plays on that sentiment, saying that you obviously have not yet admired your own beauty in the looking glass. And the important word out here is one moment. And why is one moment so important? Because one moment is all that the spider needs in order to trap the fly. The intention is basically to make the fly believe in the false praise that the spider is showering on her, to lull it into a sense of being complacent. The spider is actually weaving, and I would suggest to use this phrase, is actually weaving a web of false praise around the fly, slowly, just as the way, in the manner in which he actually constructs its real web, slowly, carefully, and very, very delicately. Its weapons in the fourth stanza are flattery. Another important departure that we see from the first three stanzas is that the spider initially had asked the question very politely, will you walk into my parlor? Will you rest upon my little bed? Will you please take a slice? He realizes that these kind of entreaties don't quite work. So this time it's much more of a suggestion than an invitation. And it works to an extent because the fly, even though does not accept the suggestion, but the manner in which she refuses is different from the first three stanzas. Earlier it was a very emphatic no, no, repeated no, no. But this time she actually thanks the spider, calls the spider as gentle sir for the suggestion that he has made, and says we'll call another day. So it means that she has not completely shut the door on whatever the spider had said. And that is something very different in this particular fourth stanza. And as a poetic technique, what the poetess has managed to do is to create a sense of suspense. Again, realize that this is targeted at children, so you need to kind of have that element of intrigue and suspense to keep the children interested in this story that is unfolding within this poem, right? Because they may think maybe this fly will fall into the trap now, or maybe she will continue to be as clever as she has been in the first part of the poem. Now look at this exchange, imagining that these could actually be two human beings conversing with each other, and this shows the poet's understanding of how the human brain actually works, because we are vigilant normally, but the moment someone actually praises us, even though we may or may not realize that it is false praise, our guard tends to drop a little bit and we are not rude anymore. We are much more civil and courteous and polite. Stanza 5, the spider turned him round about and went into his den. The word den is important, for well he knew the silly fly would soon be back again. So he wove a subtle web in a little corner sly and set his table ready to dine upon the fly. Then he came out to his door again and merrily did sing, come hither, hither, pretty fly, with a pearl and silver wing. Your robes are green and purple, there is a crest upon your head, your eyes are like the diamond bright, but mine are dull as lead. Okay. The first half of the fifth stanza has a couple of important words, as I said, that actually convey a lot. In contrast to the spider calling its parlor, its dwelling, etc., the poetess refers to it as his den, and that's something important because the word immediately has a very sharp and loud negative connotation, because we use the word for villain's den or a lion's den, and a lion, as we know, is a predator, right? So then the fly is referred to as silly, right, by the spider in a private moment. It shows that it is not wearing anymore the mask of praise and polite behavior like most humans do, right? When no one is listening, we actually speak our mind. The web which is the trap that the spider has woven is actually very subtle. He knows that the trap of fake praise is not very noticeable. It's very subtle, like his earlier invites was, and that's why the spider is almost gloating, very happy that, it's just a matter of time, that one moment before the spider is able to trap the fly. And he also knows that the fly will actually return to near the spider's web. So now he sets his table. He's almost preparing the ground. The difference is that this time is not to dine with the fly, but to dine on the fly. The intentions are now clear to the reader. The fact that he thinks that the silly fly will come back earlier, we had seen that he had referred to the fly as wise and witty. So it shows his real opinion of the fly. Also shows that we humans also have to be wary of false praise of this kind. And it also means that he has done it with other prey, which is why he's so confident that the fly will actually come back, right? He's so confident of the devious ploy that he's actually revealing to the reader. And then he calls out to the fly once again resorting to flattery. Pretty fly, pearl and silver wing, robes green and purple, crest upon the head. His detailing, the detailing that we see out here written by Mary Botham is actually very, very colorful, very, very vivid. And lots of similes have been used here, which we will discuss a little later in the poem at the end of the explanation. The comparison of eyes to diamonds also, it's used in a slightly, he's comparing his own eyes to lead, dull as lead. So in that sense, he's kind of putting himself down in a very self-deprecatory manner in order to praise and appreciate the fly that much more. What does the sixth stanza say? Alas, alas, how very soon the silly little fly, hearing his wily flattering words, came slowly flitting by. With buzzing wings she hung aloft, then near and nearer drew, thinking only of her brilliant eyes, very important line, and green and purple hue, thinking only of her crested head, poor foolish thing. At last up jumped the cunning spider and fiercely held her fast. He dragged her up his winding stair into his dismal den within his little parlor, but she never came out again. So there's a whole lot of action that takes place in stanza 6. It starts with alas, alas. Now, who is saying these two words, alas, alas? It is a poetess, because she's feeling bad for the fly who was finally, despite all the caution that she kind of exhibited before in the first 5 stanzas, now she ends up falling into that trap. So there is a sense of lament, there is a sense of remorse expressed by the poetess that this is the fate that has befallen the fly, right? And it also makes it very clear whose side the poetess is on, right? And this time even she uses the adjective silly for the fly, because she realizes that's the real nature of the fly, that all that the fact that she was smart, that she was displaying in the first part of the poem was not really true. She ended up being very silly. And the reader is warned of the impending doom, right? She also calls the fly as a poor foolish thing and the spider as cunning. So please use these adjectives in your answers. Now, vanity proved to be the fly's downfall, because she obviously got tempted by the sweet words and the false praise of the spider, wily, flattering words, right? That's what the poet describes it as. Though it must be said that even though she's on cloud 9, a part of the fly is still wary. And how do we know that? Because she's still slowly flitting by. There is a sense of guard. She knows of the past reputation of the spider, but then the thoughts on her mind are only the praise, the false praise that the spider has showered on her. And she's dragged through all the places that the spider had described to her in the first 3 stanzas, right? The winding stair, the little bed, the curtains, everything. So it shows a sense of, she dragged through all the places as she's killed, trapped by the spider. And now, my dear little children who made this story read to idle its silly flattering words, I pray you never give heed unto an evil counselor, close heart and eye, ear and eye, and take a lesson from this tale of the spider and the fly. The last stanza is very different, because here the poetess is actually now talking directly to her audience, that is the little children, and she tells them to be wary, to be cautious, to be distrustful of any kind of false praise and any kind of sweet talk, and this is the moral of the poem, right? To be wary of the evil counselor, an evil counselor like the spider. So that's the story, the poem all about very important lessons, messaging for little children, that they need to be very, very cautious. We'll quickly go through the other figures of speech. Similes I've already spoken to you about. The other figure of speech which has been used as a poetic device is anaphora, which is a deliberate repetition of a word or a phrase, right? For instance, how handsome are your gauzy wings? How beautiful are your eyes? You know, the use of the word how again at the beginning of the sentence is a poetic device, that's anaphora. Then of course there's a repetition, as I mentioned, oh, no, no, repeated in the first three stanzas. Never, never, another word which has been emphasized, which is basically to show the emphasis of the fly, that she will not get tempted by what the spider is saying. Then of course alliteration is another poetic device used, which is basically the close repetition of consonant sounds, usually at the beginning of the words. For instance, fiercely held her fat, dismal den. You know, you see the usage of the sound essentially, right? Again, it's the prettiest little parlor. You know, the I sound is repeated here. So those are some of the poetic devices which have been used. One of the questions which have come, I think last year, either in the 11th class or the 12th class examination, which is at the paper which was set by the council, talking about the textual elements in this particular poem. So again, you need to talk about how the spider represents evil and the fly represents innocence, right? In this particular poem, the poem is narrated in a third person format, and the idea communicated in the poem is what? That the spider uses every trick in the book in order to trap the fly so that he can eat the fly as his food, and the fly tries desperately to resist the different tricks employed by the spider, right? The setting of the poem is where it's in and around the house of the spider. So those are the textual elements which have been used in this particular poem. Of course, if you are asked to do a critical analysis, which could be of a 15 marks, earlier it used to be 20 marks in the council paper, in the board examination, you could talk about how the spider tries his best, the different tricks employed, and please quote extensively from the poem. That will make your answers look that much better. The way you write also should kind of convey the element of intrigue, the element of suspense, the whole elements of false praise, and why the fly ends up falling into the trap that is being slowly and delicately set by the evil, cunning spider. So those are the elements that you should use in your answers. The other examples of alliteration that I mentioned are things like soaring up so high, you're witty and you're wise. So those are the other elements of alliteration that have been examples of alliteration that have been used in this poem. I hope this poem is very clear. It's an interesting poem, and I would strongly urge you to not leave it out as part of the percentage study that some students take recourse to. So do prepare this poem. It's an interesting poem, and I would think that it can be very highly scoring in the examination. Thank you very much for watching.